in this episode with Sarah Devereaux.
For the past 8.5 years, I've been the Oceania Pacific Director of Training at Coachmasters Academy. We've trained thousands of coaches, and leaders and managers in transformative coaching. And I think something that I really learned through that experience was like not caring so much what other people thought and like just trusting myself and backing myself. I remember my mum called me afterwards and was like, we just had this woman come in and do this amazing life coaching with our office. I can see you doing something just like that. And I had no idea there was even a thing called life coaching. And they used to play all these positive cassette tapes in the car. And all the, I guess I'm reflecting now, there was probably quite a bit of like subliminal messages that came through that I must have adopted.
So, Sarah, I know how successful you've been in your own right as a coach, internationally qualified, and we'll get to that stuff soon. But I'm really interested in some things I don't know about you, which is your childhood and what that was like and where you've come from. So can you talk to us about that, about who you were as a child and what your upbringing was?
Yeah. So I grew up on the North Shore in Auckland. I'm half American. So my mum is from New York and my father is a Kiwi. My mother grew up from a Jewish background. And my father actually used to be a priest, a Catholic priest, and they met over in New York. And obviously my father's not in the priesthood anymore, being that, he's married and had children. We grew up in kind of an agnostic type setting, and we're kind of, I guess, encouraged to form our own beliefs and connect with our own values and things like that.
Right.
So I have an older brother, and it's always a bit interesting, I guess, with a big brother and a younger sister dynamic. He's quite outgoing and loved to be the centre of attention. So I did mostly take a bit of a back seat, I guess, as a child. I think I really grew into myself more through teenagehood, and especially when my now husband and I fell pregnant with our eldest, who is now 14 and a half. But high school sweethearts turned into teen parents. Mm-hmm. And I guess it really made us both grow up relatively quickly.
Yeah. So so if you can, I'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a big part of your life, obviously, right? But if we can go back a little bit to what was school like? What were you like at school? What kind of character were you?
Yeah.
What kind of personality? If we could watch a video now of Sarah, what would we see?
Well, I always remember myself being quite kind. and gentle, I think, as a child. I had a small group of friends, and then, in high school, kind of, got thrown into quite a big school where I didn't know anybody, so I could kind of start afresh. And, for me it was, about kind of just having like a close group of friends that I really connected with. I used to play a bit of sport. I did a little bit of drama, a bit of acting.
Right.
But
So when you say you went to a bigger school, sort of thrown in with lots of other kids that you didn't know, did you move somewhere, or did you did you transition from school with your friends to the same high school or college or whatever, or did you move away and therefore that was what the change was?
Yeah, so we did move. We were still on the North Shore, but I went to Rangitoto College, which back then I think was the biggest school in the country.
Right.
So, there were a lot of kids there. And I guess in a way I could kind of create my identity in this new school because I didn't know anyone. So I think during teenage years I did become a bit more outgoing. And I could just kind of figure out, I guess, as you do at that age, who am I and how do I want to show up as in this world?
And who were you? Who did you want to show up as? What were your thoughts back then about who you wanted to be as a person growing up? Can you recall any of that?
Yeah, I definitely wanted to be more outgoing. And I remember consciously actually putting in effort to, make more friends and connect with more people. So, intentionally I did decide to do that, which kind of helped, I guess, in high school, getting into, the sorts of groups that you probably want to be in at high school. But I guess there's quite a bit that comes along with that, right?
Yeah. So was that because you mentioned something about your brother, and how much older was your brother?
He was 3 years older.
Okay. So, and he was obviously a character.
Still
and
is.
You took a back. I think you maybe took a back seat. You said, or something like that, terms to that effect. So, were you as a younger child a bit more shy and less outgoing? Is that what?
Yeah, that's right.
All right. And so, in high school, you decided to make that change. Was there something that triggered that for you, or was there, what was it in your mind that happened that you thought, actually, I'm not going to be quiet and shy anymore. I'm going to be a bit more outgoing. Was there something that triggered that?
Yeah, I think it was just more an opportunity to start afresh, going from an intermediate that, maybe one or two other kids from my intermediate went to that high school. Nobody knew me, so I could kind of create a bit of an identity of who I wanted to show up as a teenager. And I guess at that age you kind of, you want to be liked, you want to be approved of, you want to have friends. And so, I guess it was just quite a, I don't know the word, but it was just really intentional around, all right, this is how I'm going to show up at high school, and let's just kind of see how this evolves.
Yeah.
And I think, when you're a young teenager, 13 or so, it's quite a poignant age where we are starting to find out, who am I in this world? Who do I want to be in this world? And so, upon reflection, I was very decisive, I guess, at that time.
Yeah. Did you have any thoughts about, I can only speak from, from my personal experience on this. I mean, I grew up knowing what I wanted to be from the age of about 5 or 6.
Yeah.
I don't have any personal recollection of that, but I've been told by family that I was talking about that at about 5 or 6, and then that was my focus in life. Did you have any of that? Did you know what you wanted to be when you sort of grew up I mean, I'm still growing up. I still don't know. But did you have any ideas back then about what you wanted to do with your life?
Yeah, well, interesting that you say that, because I do recall we used to kind of sometimes drive past the Bombay Hills coming out of Auckland on a trip, and my parents actually brought this up to me a little while ago, and they said, "Do you remember that you used to say that you wanted to run like a women's centre where people would go horse riding and women would be looked after and there'd be massages um, and when they told me that, I was like, wow, really interesting, because it's kind of brought me to where I am now, actually holding women's retreats. I don't own a centre yet, but yeah, I guess that kind of that care for others has always been in me.
Yeah.
And
so almost kind of subliminally, you've kind of been on a path that's taken you to where you were talking about when you were a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, eh?
It is interesting upon reflection.
Yeah. So did you, was there a reason that you were, I mean, obviously if you didn't really recall that, your parents reminded you of it, but was there any awareness of why you wanted to do that back then when you were younger?
I don't recall, to be honest. Yeah, I can just remember in my mind, I guess, the vision of seeing this really beautiful house and horses around it as we were driving through. And yeah, I just mentioned to them that, I'd love to own something like this one day and hold. I didn't know they were called retreats back then, but I really wanted a space for people to be able to kind of be nurtured and to, be looked after and, just do things for themselves, I think. So,
yeah, that's quite cool that you've found yourself doing that now. Eh?
Yeah, it is
really
very
good.
cool.
So what when you were a teenager at school then, right, and you're going through this kind of, I'll call it a bit of a transition, but, an awakening maybe of, actually, I'm going to decide who I'm going to be. What were your sort of aspirations then as a teenager? Did you have any kind of goals, or I'm going to leave school and do this, or I'm actually just going to see where things go? What was your attitude towards that stuff then?
Yeah, I don't think I knew exactly what I wanted to be as such. I did always do really well in health, Haiora, and I remember always receiving excellences in that class, which was all around like mental, emotional, physical, spiritual health. And I didn't think anything of it at the time, but that is, I guess, me doing really well at something and finding something really interesting. That in itself has kind of followed me through. Although at the time I had no idea, what could even be a career out of that. Yeah. It was just something that I really seemed to get a lot out of.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, talk us through your path into, from school into your career. How did that come about?
Yeah. So after I finished high school, I had a gap year and got a job working at the bank. Right. And I actually did really, really well. I won a whole bunch of like sales awards and things like that. So I thought, okay, that's, naturally I must be good at speaking to people in sales, which was cool. And then I ended up falling pregnant during that gap year. And I went on maternity leave, and I realised at that time that I never actually wanted to work for anybody again. I wanted to do my own thing. And both my parents had always been entrepreneurs and had kind of ran their own businesses, worked their own hours and things like that. So it didn't feel like something that I couldn't do. I mean, I'd seen my parents do it, so obviously I thought I could do it. Yeah. So I didn't go back to school. Oh, sorry, back to ASB Bank, I should say. I ended up going to uni and studying marketing and business, as well as studying to become a life coach. And the reason that I got into coaching was I went to all of these young mums groups and I just saw these young women who had already kind of put themselves into a box of, okay, I'm a young mum now, I could never achieve this, or okay, I'm a young mum, this is kind of, I've fallen into this life now and this is, I guess they had a lot of limitations. And I just didn't think like that. And so I decided to train as a life coach and got very much into personal development, kind of reading all the books. And it was a time where I decided that actually I want to help youth transition into adulthood. So that's kind of where I niched myself. And then the owner of the academy who I trained with, she said, do you want to start a branch down here or down in Tauranga? And being a naive, I think probably 23-year-old or so at that time, I was like, yeah, sure. So I put all my savings into, getting a lease for the office and putting some of that into marketing. And we moved down from Auckland to the Bay. And my husband was playing for the Steamers at the time. It ended up becoming really quite successful. Yeah. So there I was at 23, 24, training all of these people how to become a life coach. And by this time, I had kind of moved up in my credential level through the International Coaching Federation, and I'd achieved my PCC. And the owner of Coach Masters Academy was looking for somebody to bring Coach Masters into New Zealand, which is an internationally recognised qualification in transformative coaching, which is all about creating, it's a generative approach to creating change that's sustainable rather than just kind of putting a Band-Aid on something and hoping it will go away. And so I felt like I'd kind of grown or outgrown Tauranga and doing the work that I was doing, and I wanted to actually train throughout all of New Zealand. And so, to my parents' dismay, so I think we'd just got a mortgage by this point as well, I decided that I was going to go and check out Coach Masters. So I was going, instead of my honeymoon actually, I used that money to get on a plane and go and experience this training over, and the particular one that was held was over in Vietnam. Coach Masters is in 40 countries around the world, but this one was over in Vietnam. So I was like, all right, I'm going. I had my tickets booked. And then my mother, who also ended up co-training with me at the academy that I was training with before, she decided last minute that she would come along with me to Vietnam. I think she probably didn't want her, mid-20-year-old daughter to go off on a plane by herself and experience, something that, might be untoward. She didn't know. And she came and we both experienced it. And the training was like nothing that we had experienced before here in New Zealand. And, it's a very empirical approach to creating change that's sustainable. And so we were like, okay, let's bring it back. And so we did. And for the past 8.5 years, I've been the Oceania Pacific Director of Training at Coach Masters Academy. We've trained thousands of coaches, both and leaders and managers in transformative coaching, both in New Zealand and also around the world. And I'm now one of 4 MCC credentialed coaches through the International Coaching Federation in New Zealand. And
you were the youngest.
And the youngest in the world, yeah. So I guess I'm quite lucky. I fell into this career very early. I've just kind of, worked my way up.
Yeah, lucky or have you, my definition of luck, I don't know whether it's right or wrong, but is preparation meets opportunity. So maybe as we're talking about, you were destined to do this kind of stuff and you've, gone down that path. Yeah. Other people might have missed that and not seen the opportunity or not been prepared for it, but you were prepared for it and by all accounts even spent your honeymoon money on going. Now I need to ask, I've got several things I want to kind of unpick from what you said because there's a lot in that passage there of what you're talking about. But one is your husband, Dan.
Yeah.
Did you at least take him to Vietnam or did you just spend the honeymoon money by yourself?
I spent the honeymoon money by myself, but we have actually gone on a honeymoon, although it was, probably about 8 years later, we went to Fiji.
All right. So he got one in the end?
He did get one in the end, yes.
That's good. I might circle back around to that because by the sounds of it, there's a good level of support there based on what you've just said. The fact that you're still together when you went on your honeymoon by yourself, that's an indicative that there's some good support going on. So I'd like to come back to that if I can. But before we do, and without kind of cutting you off kind of within your career, we'll get back to where you're at right now and what you've achieved over the last 8 years. But if we can, I think because this is about, life's work is about wisdom worth sharing. And I'm sure there's probably a lot of things that you've learned along that journey from leaving school to where you are now that might be really kind of valuable to hear. And so if we can, and it seems an obvious place to start really, but it is of personal interest to me because you are a young mum, and I'm interested to hear more about that. My mum was the same age as you when she had me, and so I'm interested to understand a little bit about the impact that had on your life. Please I'll apologise if I'm wrong, but I think the way that you said it sounded like it wasn't a planned thing necessarily. And so, that is a big thing in anyone's life, whether it's planned or not, probably particularly if it's not. And so I'm interested to kind of go back to that time and to talk about you and Dan and how that event, a wonderful event of your first child being born, impacted your life, your relationships. So can you talk to me? Are you all right talking to me a bit more about that?
Yeah. So it was definitely a big, quite defining moment in my life and my husband's life. And you're right, she wasn't planned, although she was the biggest blessing we've ever had. And I guess it made us grow up really quickly and realize we need to get our stuff together. Because if we don't, our life's going to, quite possibly move in a negative direction. And it definitely came with its challenges, as young teen parents who, like Dan was kind of building his career. At the time he was playing for New Zealand under 21s.
At rugby.
Yep. It definitely kind of impacted on his career in the rugby setting because, he was kind of chucked in the deep end. And I think back then they didn't really understand like mental health that well. Yeah.
So it would have been a tough time for you, two young people. Was Dan about the same age as you, or?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, I think he was 20 when we had her, and I was 19. Yeah, fell pregnant at 18.
Yeah. I'm sorry for prying, but I'm genuinely interested because I think this stuff, it happens. Like I said, my parents were 20 and 19 when I was born, and I've often thought about asking them. Mum passed away last year, so I can't now. But I often wondered how it impacted them on their lives and what they went on to achieve. And not everybody stays together when they're that young, and can have tensions and things, and have an impact in lots of different ways. So, but you guys. So did your parents, were they supportive? And Dan's parents, that can be a big thing as well, can it? How the family responds to that kind of situation.
Yeah. I mean, initially, no. But then once we made the call that we're actually keeping her, then they did become supportive, which was amazing. And I think something that I really learned through that experience was like not caring so much what other people thought, and like just trusting myself and backing myself. And I guess being a bit more bold and ballsy with how we have kind of navigated our life. Because when you're a parent, it's like you have to bring in the money so that you can raise a family. So at that age, we had no idea how we were really going to do it. But we have. Now we own multiple properties. We've built successful businesses. We're together 17 years later. But at the time, it was like we didn't know exactly what we were going to do or how we were going to do it. But that trust in yourself, I think, or the trust that we had in ourselves, I should say, was something that I think really kind of enabled us to succeed.
So there's two things there that I'd like to pick up on. One is that trusting yourself and yourselves as a partnership, and how that affects your relationship and strengthens it. But also, you mentioned something, and I'm just trying to recall your exact words, so I'll get them wrong. But it was about not caring, or caring less about what other people thought, other people's opinions. Can you talk to me a bit more about that? Because I think that's quite powerful. I think, and again, speaking from personal experience, a lot of the reasons why we don't do things are fear-based, and the fear is actually what other people think about us. It stops us from doing a lot of things in our lives. So you, at that early age, going through what you were going through, managed to come to that realization that actually what other people think shouldn't impact me, or shouldn't have a massive influence on me and my life. Was that a conscious thing at the time, or is it something you can look back on and say, yeah, my attitude changed towards that? But was it a conscious decision that I don't really care what people think about me, or what I'm doing and what I'm about?
I don't think it was conscious. It was more that, hey, you guys are probably already talking about me being a young mum, and, so it was just more, I guess, like, this is more important, getting our lives together and creating successful lives for this child is more important. So I'm going to feel the fear and do it anyway. And, I read a great book a wee while ago called Big Magic. And there was this beautiful analogy in there, and it talks about fear is always going to be there. But if you can imagine driving in a car, fear's going to come along with you because it always just does. But you put fear in the back seat of the car, and it will try and tell you which way to go. It will tell you, to stop. Fear can come. You make friends with fear, but you give it no control over the direction that car is going or the speed in which the car is going. And you tell fear to just sit in the back and come along for the ride. And so I thought that was such a great analogy, and it kind of reminds me of, multiple times in my life where I've experienced anxiety or fear, but just pushed through it. Yeah.
I'd like to take a moment to talk about one of our sponsors. I'm really pleased to announce that we have Sharp New Zealand as a sponsor. And it's great to have Sharp on board because as a customer, I can speak about their products and services from personal experience. And it feels good to be able to endorse and recommend a company because of the level of satisfaction we have regarding the services they provide. And across my businesses, we've certainly been impressed with the care and collaboration we've experienced in our dealings with Sharp. It's certainly a brand that we trust. Sharp has a long history of creating breakthrough products designed to meet the needs of people living in New Zealand. Sharp's leadership in technology innovation ensures it's at the forefront of the pack, providing business solutions from printing and photocopying to interactive meeting solutions and ICT phone systems. No matter where you are or what size your organisation, whether you're large or small, Sharp New Zealand can provide their services to you nationwide. If you're looking to upgrade your technology or renew your photocopier leases, talk to your local Sharp team or visit the website at sharp.net.nz. Yeah. So I like that analogy. That's good. I'm going to remember that one, steal it. So you are 19 and your daughter's in your life now, and is it at that point that you are working at the bank, or do you work at the bank afterwards? Before I can't remember.
Before. So I fell pregnant while working at the bank on my gap year.
Okay.
And then went to uni after that. And
so during that period of time when you finished at the bank and you're now a mum, the most important job in the world, but you have the realization that you don't want to work for anyone else. That came pretty quick. Is that a reflection of the job at the bank, or?
Could be.
It's interesting. I've had a few guests, and myself including, who first job was working at a bank, and no one stuck there. But anyway, what was it that kind of made you think, actually, I don't want to work for anyone else. I just want to work for myself.
I guess the autonomy was something that, when you work in corporate, you don't really have too much of. And with a baby, it was like I wanted to be able to work my own hours. I still wanted to be a really dedicated mother, but also to not have a cap on how much income I could create. So, I just didn't want any of those limitations around me. I just wanted to kind of be in my own lane and just create life as I wanted to create it. And, entrepreneurship.
I was going to say, because you mentioned that about your parents. So, do you think that was a significant influence? We are obviously influenced massively by our parents, and those who we sort of grow up closest to. So you mentioned that they were entrepreneurial and had their own businesses. So do you think that was a factor for you? Is that what you saw, the lifestyle that they had and the what they had going on, and you thought that was a good fit for you?
Yeah, I did. And that was how I grew up. So for me, it was a normal option to start a business and to be self-employed. Whereas, I think possibly if I didn't grow up in a household like that, my life may have turned out very differently upon reflection.
Yeah. So, was there? What were you? Can I ask your parents? What businesses were they in? Was there a? Because my next question, I'll give you the heads up, is about why life coaching. Why did you head in that direction? You've hinted at, sorry, earlier in your childhood about caring for people and having that kind of, compassionate side of you that, wants to care for people or give them opportunities, that kind of thing. But was there another influence that led you down the path of coaching?
So I do recall, which actually I guess was maybe the defining moment where I actually found out that there was such a thing as coaching. My mother, so she was self-employed, but as a real estate agent.
Right.
And so they had somebody come in who was like a 30-something-year-old woman who came in and did some form of group coaching within their office. And I remember my mum called me afterwards and was like, we just had this woman come in and do this amazing life coaching with our office. I can see you doing something just like that. And I had no idea there was even a thing called life coaching. And so, I looked it up and then I found that there was actually an academy on the North Shore in Auckland where we lived. And that's, kind of how I fell into it. But I do remember when my parents, just as a bit of a side note, when I was younger, they used to be in a network marketing company. Right. And they used to play all these positive cassette tapes in the car. And all the, I guess I'm reflecting now, there was probably quite a bit of like subliminal messages that came through that I must have adopted, I think, just through kind of having those tapes on the background in the car.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing how much we are influenced by other people and our environment and the things that go on around it. I do leadership training and some of that, I rope into that about how, as leaders, we're influencing the whole time. And just to let people understand how powerful that influence can be. You might not know it's happening. It's a bit like why I go to the supermarket for 2 litres of milk and come out with 2 bags of shopping. And I've usually forgotten the milk by the time I've got out as well. It's like we're influenced the whole time. So I suppose driving along in the car, hearing these cassette tapes, which gives us an indication of how long ago that was, would have had an influence. Yeah, for certain.
Absolutely. And I actually now, with our 2 youngest, every night I put on positive affirmations as they go to sleep in the evenings so that, they can kind of have those positive subliminal messages going through for them as well.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I just had a flashback to a Friends episode. I don't know if you watched Friends or not, but with Chandler listening to tapes about his, what was it now, a strong, confident woman. He was about trying to stop smoking, but didn't realise that he was, and obviously it's a comedy, but the fact that tape influenced his behaviour the following day when he was waking up, it shows it works.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously there's something in it.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So, I'll carry that on with my
children.
Exactly.
That's right. So you started with the life coaching. And, when you got into that and you're starting down that track, what's that like going on a new venture? Still as a young mum, you're embarking on a new venture. Was it exciting? Were you nervous? How did it feel taking that step in that direction?
Yeah. I mean, initially, because I was working with teenagers, helping them to transition into adulthood and figure out what do they want to do. There was a bit of career coaching. We looked at relationships. We looked at, their mindset. That was exciting for me, and I felt like I was really making a difference. But then when the owner of the academy that trained me as a coach asked if I wanted to set up a branch down in Tauranga, there was quite a bit of excitement, but also, oh my gosh, am I out of my depth here? I'd never actually really run a proper business before. And, there were overheads. I had to do sales calls. I had to market. I had to teach and train. There was quite a few skills that I was developing and needing to learn about and nurture within myself. Especially naturally being quite a shy person.
Yeah.
Kind of stepping into that realm with older people who were probably like, who is this 23, 24-year-old? But I ended up being really good at it. And I ended up loving it so much that I wanted to impact more and learn new skills and, step more into leadership and, working with different sorts of coaches.
Yeah. There's a couple of points in there I want to pick up on as well. But one, probably the latter point about, your age and the kind of people that you were working with and their opinions based on age, kind of reverse ageism.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm picking up on it is I had a conversation last week with someone about this, that, because you are of a certain age, fairly young, you haven't lived a long life, you can't therefore have as much experience as someone older. So therefore, what do you know is a barrier to people kind of seeing young people as adding value, but also a barrier for young people to want to work with older people through that fear again. How was that for you? Can you describe what that was like and how you overcame it? I mean, I think you've indicated a little bit earlier about caring less about what people think, but, did that experience early in your life and that decision, did that kind of become a factor for you in business as well? How did you deal with that?
It definitely did take quite a bit to kind of show up in a way that I still felt authentic, but I always kind of felt like I had to kind of show up. I don't want to say perfectly, but I did definitely put a lot of pressure on myself to show up in a certain way so that I would have, I guess, approval from, the people that I was training. And it's only recently, I think, now that I've kind of actually earned all my stripes, that imposter syndrome has kind of fallen by the wayside. Like, I can genuinely say right now that I know what I'm doing and that I feel like I'm really good at what I do. Like, I can actually say that, whereas before I always kind of had a bit of imposter syndrome at play. One thing, though, that came to me just as you were talking that I think is a benefit for younger people is that they don't have as many limiting self-beliefs around what is possible and what is not possible, because I didn't have that, I guess a huge amount of life experience in that space. I didn't have many doors slammed in my face. I just kind of, took opportunities, said yes to them, and then figured it out, and then they all kind of worked. So I think that was actually one of the positives that came out of being young doing this.
Yeah, I suppose having not so many no's or reasons. Like, I think we build over time, don't we, as we get older. Not only do we get wiser, but sometimes that wisdom's kind of negatively geared because of all the setbacks, knockbacks, no's we've had, or reasons why we can't do things. Whereas when you're younger, you're a bit more fearless because you seem a bit more fearless. I don't know whether you are actually fearless, but you've not got all of those reasons kind of weighing you down as a bit of an anchor. Yeah, it's interesting. So if we can go back to the business side of things, the other point I wanted to raise was, you obviously had a natural ability, and I suppose you also mentioning the fact that you feel now that after already a lengthy career, successful career in coaching, It's only now that you can look back and say, actually, I'm good at what I do because, you're certified to a certain level and you've achieved certain things. But, back then when you started that business, you didn't have that certification, you didn't have that qualifications. You maybe felt like it's something you could do. But the coaching itself is one thing. Running a business, as you've identified, is another. And all of that comes with wanting to do your own thing and while not working for someone else, doesn't it? So is there, are there any lessons that you've learned around that for not just young people, but anyone who's looking to start a business because they're good at something, but want to do it for themselves? What kind of lessons or wisdom can you impart about that and taking on that journey? Because we're not, we're a nation of small businesses, and you might be a really good plumber and you set up your own plumbing business. That's a different game completely than being a great plumber. And so have you got any thoughts or advice, guidance, lessons that you learned along the way that you could pass on?
Yeah. I think for me, I get a lot of exhilaration and joy from having an idea and actually bringing that idea to life.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't actually feel like work when I'm doing that. It's like I just have this sense of energy and creativity within me that is kind of just spilling out. And it's like there's a fine balance between knowing exactly where you're headed and getting too deep into the detail. It's like when you know where you're headed, but you're not too deep into the detail and the how am I going to do it, there's kind of this sweet spot. And it's in that place where fear hasn't overcome you because you're too far into the how am I actually going to do this? But you're feeling all those feelings of commitment and you're energized and you're purposeful and you're dedicated, you know where you're going. So it's like making sure that you're specific enough around where you're headed, but not too caught up in the specifics of the detail that it freaks you out and then you kind of talk yourself out of it or get paralyzed by the fear. Yeah.
So balance, it's about balance then really, isn't it? I mean, I'm thinking as you're talking there about my journey in business and, if you don't get the balance right, I don't think I did when I started my recent business. When I say recent, 6 years ago. I'm just reflecting now based on what you're saying. I'm thinking actually, I ended up too much focused on doing the doing, which not doing the doing as in what I wanted to do and why I wanted to start the business. I ended up absorbed by running the business, if that makes sense. So all the things that are required in order for a business to, exist and to be successful, there's a lot of plates that need spinning or balls to be kept in the air. I think my balance tipped too much the other way, that I was focused too much on that and not so much on the reason for wanting to get into the business. I had that realization, a couple of years down the track, but it was 2 years down the track. And I think that's the thing, is maybe keeping an eye on why you wanted to go into business, what was it about, how can I achieve what I want to achieve without getting absorbed too much by the backroom stuff or focusing too much on the front of shop, which is front of house, which is what I'm good at. And because too much focus in one direction means that the balance is going to tip and it'll fall over. So does that make sense to you? Or is that, I'm just thinking about, you don't necessarily know how to run a business, the accounting side of things. You might not be a salesperson. You might not be this, that, and the other, but you know that you want to do what you're good at or what your passion is. And it's about trying to work out, how can I get there and whose help do I need? I think that's an important thing.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really great point. And I guess for me, what I did is I kind of surrounded myself with a bit of a team who could do what I couldn't do. And I was never shy in spending money to outsource certain aspects that were not my zone of genius. So I think, if we try and do all of it ourselves and are kind of penny pinching, that's a difficult space to create real momentum in a business. So it's kind of being able to have that high level view and, look at, okay, these are all the aspects of the business that I'm trying to kind of bring together in a way that is going to move it forward to where I'm wanting it to go. What do I love? What am I good at? What aspects of these do I really want to be doing in the business? And what is just going to feel like a hard slog for me if I was to do that? Okay, I'm going to outsource my bookkeeping, for example. I've become a better writer, but I used to just employ somebody to write my ads or, write certain content for marketing because that's their zone of genius. And I know my marketing needs to be on point in order for us to actually move this forward. So, yeah, it's kind of like knowing what is going to be best use of your time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Zone of genius. I've not heard that term before, actually. Where does that come from? Can you explain that?
Yeah. So when I think about that term, and I'm actually not sure where I've heard it, I've kind of used that term for a while now. But for me, it's like, what is it that kind of gets my gears going? And what is it that I feel like I am very capable of doing and have capacity to kind of nurture and grow? And brings about, joy and excitement and fulfillment. That's kind of what I mean by zone of genius. It's like, what can I offer into this business that nobody else can offer? And it's like focusing our energy there.
Yeah. So the few words that you used there, joy and, you've really got to enjoy what you do to have your own business and make a success of it, haven't you? You've got to be in your element. You've got to love doing it and be good at it. Because if you're not one of those, then it's not likely to succeed for long, maybe. Or it might, but if you're not happy, is that true success?
Exactly.
So you talked about for the last 8 years, you've been running the most successful, largest coaching organisation in New Zealand. Is that right? Am I right with that? Talk to me a bit more about that specific journey and what that meant to you to achieve that when you did.
Yeah. So it's definitely been a big journey. It started off holding, a lot of face-to-face trainings, combined with some follow-up online work. And more recently with COVID, it's pretty much all turned online and became rather global. For me, I've always found so much kind of passion and joy in seeing people make shifts. And so I've always kind of come back to this vision around creating a ripple effect of positive change. And so by training a leader in this skill set, for example, that is going to have an impact on their relationships with their family, with their team, and have a ripple effect through their organisation. So it always felt super in alignment, and I always experienced a lot of joy through training. And I guess when COVID happened, we had to kind of, cancel a few of our face-to-face trainings, postpone, move things online. It was, a bit of a mission, in all honesty. And then, really focused on building my team over the past couple of years so that it wasn't just me doing the training. We had, I have a team of 11 that was doing the training. And, just really started to kind of create different connections overseas, understand different cultures a lot more. There's quite a bit in that, actually,
So just to clarify for people watching or listening, that the training was you're training people to be coaches, right? Not just coaching.
Correct,
So you're training people to be a coach.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so, a big change, from face-to-face to online. And a lot of businesses, including mine, had to kind of try and make that change in order to survive. I think the key word that everybody used was pivot. It became one of those words I hated hearing, to be honest with you. It's just synonymous with COVID. But so, a lot of businesses went through that. What was the impact on you having to have that kind of change of approach? Was it different doing this online versus face-to-face? And when I say obviously it's different, but was it different for you from a feeling, joy perspective?
Yes, it was. For me, there's something about being in a room with people face-to-face and just helping to kind of nurture the collective awareness and wisdom inside of that room. And, it is so potent and so powerful when that can be done really well. And when we moved online, it's a completely different way of interacting and pulling together that collective wisdom and disseminating content. Because we had global cohorts, I also had to work a lot of evenings, so my work-life balance kind of got thrown out the window, and it definitely shifted from how I felt about the first 6 years of doing it to the last 2 to 3 years.
Well, it's a real. I think it's an issue for workplaces globally, and I think my personal opinion on this is that we are all going to realize more and more as time goes on what we're missing from not being physically connected. Virtually connected is great, and now we're all using it a lot more than what we were pre-COVID because we're so used to it, and it has its obvious benefits from an efficiency point of view, cost point of view, saving the environment point of view, all of that kind of stuff. But in my view, we lose something, and I think, I know, not from my research, but from reading about research, that actually we don't get the same chemical kind of boost that we get, like oxytocin hit. We don't get the same virtually as we do when we're in the room together. So that energy you were talking about that comes from having a team of people together or people in the same room, achieving and growing at the same time, that buzz is real. It's a biological thing that we get. And it's harder it's not impossible, but it's harder to obtain virtually, I think. Yeah. And I think people are starting to realize that. That was why I asked that question, because I've got a genuine interest in, the virtual kind of working world or hybrid working world where we work from home a lot and then we get together now and again. What's the long-term impacts of that? And so that's why I was interested in that. So how did that change your opinion about the work that you were doing? Did it? I mean, did you get to a point where you thought, actually, all right, this isn't the same as what it was and I'm going to change and do something different?
Yeah.
It's a loaded question because I know that you're doing something different, right? So I know that, and I'm kind of wondering whether that was a factor in, the reason for change.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, after doing something for so long, actually, let me backtrack a little bit. I always thought, this is what I'm always going to do. I love it so much. Why would I ever do anything different? But over the past, 2 to 3 years, with having not much work-life balance, having, global cohorts that we were running, multiple cohorts at the same time all over the world, having a big team that I was also having to show up for and manage and lead and motivate them. And there was a lot that I didn't actually want. And it was kind of like I'd fallen into this position which was not really giving me that fulfillment that I had always had throughout my whole career. And so my husband and I decided that we were going to have a bit of a pause. So we've just recently got back actually from a 6-month caravanning family adventure around the country with our 3 girls, our little dog in tow. And I did minimal work while I was away. And just really spent that time reconnecting with myself, what's important, what do I actually want, and just kind of, every morning I would wake up on whatever beach around the country that would be waking up at, and I would just sit there and I would watch the sunrise, and I would just have that beautiful, quiet time. And throughout that time, there was, a part of me that knew I didn't want to be doing what I was doing anymore. I knew that, but I felt like I was so entwined in it. It's what I built here. It was my baby here. I took it from its infancy all the way to where it is now. My identity was wrapped up in being a trainer of coaches. I had a team. I had, globally, we have a huge team that's relying on me. The founder of, Coach Masters was relying on me. Financially, we were relying on it, partially. And so, it was like I was actually experiencing a lot of angst, knowing I needed to get out, but feeling quite trapped in how do I do that? So what happened was, and I think where the real turning moment for me is when I stopped focusing so much on, oh my gosh, how am I going to get out of this? I feel so trapped. I can't do it. I've got to stay in it, et cetera, to, well, what do I actually want? What is it that lights me up? What is it that, that I'm good at? What have I always wanted to do? Maybe this, being a trainer of coaches isn't the be all and end all for me. What is it that I really want? I've built all of these skill sets. I have all of these connections. What do I want and what can I do? And so I guess going back to what I mentioned earlier about running retreats and how that was something that I've always kind of wanted to do. It came to me that as women, we just don't have these pauses often enough. And I guess as leaders or business owners in general, we just don't have these pauses where we hop off the hamster wheel, we allow for the quietening of the noise, and we actually spend that time really connecting with our essential selves, who we are, what we want. And I decided that I was going to create a company called Pause Retreats, and was going to hold retreats for people to actually pause and spend that time reconnecting with themselves and gaining clarity on, well, what do I want in all of this? You know, what do I actually want? And then to be supported to not only be brave enough to move forward with that, but also to have the resources available to them to resource themselves so they can move forward. And so the angst actually that I was experiencing when I was kind of focused on more of how the heck am I going to get out of this thing, it actually, I started to feel those energizing feelings again. It was quite instantaneous actually, where I kind of felt those feelings of being energized, and that the creation process, like deliberately creating something from a thought and bringing that into reality, has always been my favorite thing to do. And being able to kind of step back into that and start creating, I kind of got my zest for life back. And I'm still working with Coach Masters, just in a different capacity. It's an incredible program, and I'm still selling the program and promoting the program, but I've stepped back as the Oceania Pacific Director of Training, and have now moved in to running Pause Retreats, and also working with C-suite and senior leaders through MindForge, where we coach and have leadership training, and also holding a couple of retreats through there now too. So
Cool.
yeah, I'm feeling really on purpose, and like I'm back in line in my own lane of where I'm wanting to head.
It's interesting to sort of listen to your story and how things stitch together. So as a child, you were talking about not having even known what a retreat was, but you were kind of describing that very thing. You, in a way, had a retreat yourself, going on your family trip. How long were you away for?
6 months.
6 months. And, you know, importantly, you talked about having that time to think and reflect, and the angst that you went through, you know, and what came out of it was needing to create that opportunity for others to do that, and to have the opportunities that you had and created for yourself to be able to find out, so what? So what next? Which I think is quite powerful, isn't it? The reason for doing it is because that's who you are and who you've been actually for most of your life, and you've got to a point where now you can do that as a business and giving other people the opportunity to find themselves, which is fantastic. So it's great that you are now back in that zone of genius, right? Of being creative and creating something new. And I want to talk a bit more about that if I can going forward. You know, but just before I do, there was something. I think it was when you said, and I noticed. I think it detected a little bit of emotion earlier, but there was something you said, and you swallowed quite hard when you said it, and it was about stepping back from what it is that you've been doing for the last 8 years. And I think there's some important lessons for people within that it's not easy when you've built something. You referred to it as your baby. And you know, and some of the words you used, like being trapped. It's really hard for someone to recognize that that's what they are, is trapped, and to work out how to get out of something that's, for you, it was really successful. It was not like you needed to get out of it because it wasn't working. You were really successful at it. Like probably, overly successful in that it started to impinge on your work-life balance, as you described.
Yeah.
But making that decision to leave something that you've created, you've grown, is not easy, but it's the right decision. Did that take a while to get to grips with?
Yes.
Have you got to grips with it yet?
Yeah. I mean, I was saying to my husband the other day, I was like, I just feel so free. And yeah, I mean, whilst we were traveling, I guess it was like I was experiencing a lot of angst. And I guess I had to tap into my courage and kind of overcome that fear of stepping into the unknown and back myself that actually I know I can do this. I've built multiple businesses before. I know how to do this. I've run multiple events, heaps and heaps of events before. I can do this. And it was amazing. Like my husband, he's like, babe, this is well overdue. This is years overdue. Like you should have been doing this a long time ago. And he just said to me, like I believe in you. You can do this. So it was kind of the combination of like his support and kind of not allowing my negative self-talk to get in my way and just like actually connect in with this is actually what I want. And looking at my history and the amount of times that I've kind of achieved things that maybe at the time I didn't think I could achieve, and actually just like, okay, yeah, Sarah, you actually can do this, so do it.
So I'm sort of feeling that the fear of stepping into the unknown, was that the stronger fear, or was the fear of leaving behind what you'd built the stronger of the two? Because you've like you've said, you've done lots of things over your life, and you've been successful at them, and you started off doing things really young, and you had that confidence. You just said, I'm going to do it, I'm capable, and you went and did it, proved it to yourself, right? So you've got the recipe, you know how to do things. So was that the biggest fear? You talk about angst while you were away. Was the angst about the fear of stepping into something new, or was it more about the fear of leaving things behind?
It was the fear of leaving things behind, I think, mostly. Well, there's probably a bit of both at play. Like, can I actually do this? But at the same time, I think, there's a bit of grief. Like, I built this whole thing here. And, it's like, as I said, it was like my baby. It was like my fourth child, Yeah. And I think the angst was also just around, like, I'm so intertwined with this. Like, it was like I'm wrapped up almost. That's how I felt anyways. And I just didn't know how to kind of get out. And, I didn't want to let my team down. I didn't globally want to let anyone down. I knew financially it was taking a risk for our family. So there was just so many kind of aspects to it that by spending, every day just kind of having that time, that quiet time to really reflect and to think things through without just ignoring it. It would have been easy to ignore it and just bury my head into work and just keep going on that hamster wheel. And 10 years later, I'd still be doing the same thing, 20 years or however long, But yeah, it was really about stepping into a space of courage that enabled me to move through that angst. And the key was dropping in that little piece of what am I going to create? As soon as I stepped into that piece of what am I going to create and started that process, the angst just kind of subsided, and naturally I was able to build up the courage to make that call and to step back.
Yeah. So I suppose why the image in my mind there was really about the change of focus. Where you put your focus, your energy goes into, right? So you get more of what you focus on. So the minute you focused on what you're going to create, you stopped being anxious about what you were leaving behind. Is that
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it is that whole thing around, what you focus on expands. And there's such different feelings that come from, like, how am I going to get out of this, to, this is what I'm creating, and it just feels so good. And, you get into that state of flow. And it's literally just that focal point.
Yeah.
And shifting that.
Yeah. You mentioned negative self-talk. I think this is important to talk about because in some respects, maybe incorrectly, I think, someone like yourself who's a coach, international qualifications, the youngest coach with the qualifications you've got in the world, and built this great business, and you've trained how many people to be coaches?
Yeah. 1,000 or 2,000 or something now. Yeah, it's a lot.
So, excuse my language, but someone looking at you would think you've got your shit together. You would know, everything would be lined up and everything will be perfect. But you're human, aren't you? So it's just because you are in that industry doesn't mean that you don't feel the things that people who are not in that industry, who don't have that qualification, who don't have that ability to coach and help other people through those kind of situations and times. Doesn't mean that you don't experience that. And clearly you've shared that with us, which is great. So what I'm interested in, though, is how did you use what you know to help you through that process? And did you involve anyone else in that? What was your kind of process for going through that?
Yeah. So I have my own coach, and I had monthly sessions with her, and was just kind of, just working through this process. I didn't want to rush it. Like, I didn't just want to make the call and then have everything kind of fall to pieces. I wanted to make sure it was actually what I wanted. So having her as a sounding board was really valuable. And also, I guess, like, what did serve me was being aware of how I was looking at the situation, like being able to actually have that awareness. So I would be able to notice, okay, how am I looking at this right now? Is this serving me? How might I look at this differently? What beliefs are at play here? What values am I really wanting to be in alignment with? Which of my values have been impacted or are being impacted currently, which is making me want to kind of get out? So I guess just having like a heightened self-awareness was really powerful. And I didn't judge myself either for kind of going through this. I didn't beat myself up. I was just kind of gently kind of going through the process that I needed to go through.
Yeah. So a higher level of consciousness. I think, there's some real lessons in there for everyone. Being aware, self-aware. How am I feeling? What's impacting on that? I think it's a real problem for a lot of people, and I've been there and done that myself, where you end up doing so much every day. You get up, you do the same things every day, you feel the same way. You become normalized to it. But it's not until you stop and look at where was this taking me? Is it where I wanted to go? Am I on the right track or not? It's not until you do that you can start to question and see, well, maybe I'm not. And make conscious decisions about where to next.
Yeah.
And so I want to ask you, you've alluded to it a couple of times, and I did say we'd come back to this. Excuse me. And I was jokingly talking about this when you spent your honeymoon money on going for training, but your relationship with Dan and with your parents and other people who are close to you, you've obviously got a strong support network there. How important has that been for you to follow what you want to do with your life?
Yeah. Big, I think. Having someone that's kind of in your corner and is willing to back you and just kind of journey with you is something that I think has definitely helped throughout my whole career, but especially throughout this time. Yeah, my husband has always been my biggest support. And, we've grown so much over the past 17 years. But I'm the same for him. It's like we are just journeying together, trying to have the coolest, most epic life that we can have and just be in our own lane, kind of creating it together, separately but together. So, yeah, the support network is definitely a big thing. But I think at the same time, even if I didn't have Dan, just by creating that space for myself to hop off the hamster wheel and to really listen to myself, I still probably would have ended up doing the same thing. It might have taken a bit longer, but, yeah, I probably would have ended up.
Yeah. So what does the future look like for Sarah? You've started your pause retreats business. What's your future aspirations? You're still very young, obviously, and you've got a long life ahead of you, a long career ahead of you. What does it look like, and what are your goals and aspirations at this point?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I kind of, whilst we were away, I said to my husband, let's look at our life in stints. Okay, we've just done our caravan stint. Prior to that, I was doing my CMA stint. Now we're up in Pahoja. We're doing our Pahoja stint. But we have so many things that we want to do. Like, we haven't written a bucket list, but there are so many different things I want to experience. And so, for me, running these retreats bring me so much joy. Like the first one that we ran, I've never felt more aligned to anything in my life. I was able to kind of have like the structure of what I was taking them through, but I could just speak from this place of authenticity and knowing, and it just felt so natural. And the transformations that I saw people go through just brought so much kind of like light to my heart, So I will definitely be running more of these. With a couple of our top coaches who were in my team at CMA, we've gone off and we've created MindForge as well. They're agile coaches. And so we're also running some leadership type retreats and doing some, high-end kind of leadership training and coaching as well. Mm-hmm. So I'll continue doing that too, and who knows where that's going to go. But I'm enjoying working alongside people, actually. I think, I've got quite a good work-life balance at the moment. For a while there, I wasn't seeing the kids much, which was really difficult. So, picking them up from school and having lovely evenings together. We live right on the beach, and we've got a a little dog and a lamb that we, sometimes take for walks. Our lamb thinks she's a dog. And it's just like, it feels like a very nice, wholesome kind of lifestyle. And yeah, we've got some properties that we're developing. So my husband, Dan, is really just on purpose with the mahi that he's doing. And he's feeling really connected and aligned with that. And would like to do more travel. Just experience and expand and just like have fun. I want my life to be fun.
Yeah, that already sounds like fun.
It's pretty fun.
That's good. That's good. So life's work is about, the podcast is really about three things. And you've talked about your life, which we're grateful for, and your work. And the third thing is about legacy. So, if you're kind of sitting on the porch, on your rocking chair at some point in the distant future, looking back, what would you want your legacy to be? What would what's it all been for?
It's a really good question. I think mostly for my kids to see that anything is possible for them, and for us to have lived a very full, expansive, fun, fulfilling life where we've been able to create it however we wanted to, not based on societal expectations or what we should be doing, but for us to have actually lived true to creating our life however we want to create it. And for me to look back and think, yeah, we did that.
Yeah, fantastic. Sarah, it's been great having you on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to me today and to share your life's work and your story. I've learned a lot from it, and I'm sure a lot of other people will. I wish you every success in everything that you do from here on in. I know that you will be anyway. You're not going to settle for anything less than success. But thank you. I really do appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us today.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Cool. In this episode, I talk with Sarah Devereaux. And while Sarah is still young, certainly compared to me, she has already filled her life with some amazing achievements and is living life the way that she wants to live it. As you'll hopefully know by now, if you've seen other episodes, this segment of the podcast is about wisdom worth sharing. At the end of every interview, I'll look back as part of the editing process and discover some of the gems that came out in the conversation and summarize them here. Sarah shared with us that she and her partner had become teenage parents, and that instead of this blessing holding their careers back in any way, their situation became the motivation for them to succeed. It drove them to make decisions they may not have made if they hadn't have had a young family to support. Decisions which ultimately have resulted in them both being successful in their own right. Sarah has started a number of successful businesses. She's the youngest person to attain Master Certified Coach credentials through the International Coaching Federation. And between them, now 17 years on in their relationship, the couple own multiple properties and have been in a position to be able to take 6 months off and travel as a family with their 3 daughters to discover what the next phase of life could be like. Sarah talked quite a bit about the need to do this, to take a pause and just be, in order to reflect and find her essential self. There were several important lessons within this segment of the interview. One was recognizing that even when you have created a business, you've built it from the ground up, and you've turned it into a successful machine, when you are no longer doing what you intended to do within the business, and possibly no longer enjoying it, maybe it's time to reflect and ask yourself, is this still the right thing for me to be doing? We discussed the need to be in your element, enjoying your business. Because if you're not, and even if the business is doing well, can you say that you are truly successful? Now, I've always said that there's only 2 reasons why people do anything. One is to gain something, and the second is to avoid a loss. It's hard to let go of things that you already have, so the strongest emotions are usually involved in avoiding a loss. And as Sarah said, it was the fear of losing something, letting go of what she had created, that was the strongest emotion for her. It was holding her where she was. It wasn't the fear of what's coming next. While Sarah was in it, she couldn't see a way out of it. And I think this applies to any situation that is, for whatever reason, causing us angst. If we are too close, it's hard to have any kind of objectivity. So our logical and rational thinking is impeded by our emotions. Sarah needed to get away, to be able to see her business from a different perspective. When she was able to look from the outside in, or actually not even be looking at all, instead being in the moment enjoying her family, that's when clarity came to her. And that was that she wasn't where she was supposed to be. Allowing her mind to sort things out in the quiet of her pause away from everything made the obvious next step so much easier. Not easy, but easier to take. Although still somewhat emotional thinking about it, she was able to make the decision to step away from the baby that she had grown and start another business opportunity, one more aligned with where her values and goals were now. Interestingly, her new venture, Pause Retreats, is exactly what she did for herself. And I'm sure it will be a success, because who couldn't benefit from a pause away from everything? You could say that this was a brave move, but after listening to Sarah's story, we shouldn't be surprised of her bravery or her tenacity to make things work. As Sarah described, her attitude is, feel the fear and do it anyway. After becoming a young mum, she decided that she wasn't just going to get any old job for any old company. She left her role at the bank as a teenager after just 1 year, and she's never looked back. She said she needed to be in control of her destiny, be able to be the best mum that she could be, but also not be limited or capped in what she could earn. And that meant she needed the flexibility, freedom, and unlimited scope that only her own business could provide her. So that's what she did. Sarah also mentioned that the support of her family when it came to finding her way in life was important, with her mum calling her from work one day to say that she'd seen a coach and she thought that Sarah could be great at that. Sarah had never heard of life coaching before that call. Her mum was a catalyst to a great career, because she was able to see in her daughter the skills and attributes that would make a good coach. And it turns out that Sarah became a great coach, one of the best. This demonstrates how important it is for us as parents, co-workers, leaders and managers to look for and point out the attributes of those around us, because they may not realize what they're good at or what possibilities lay ahead for them. So yes, Sarah's mum believed in her, but also, and most importantly, Sarah believed in herself. She just needed a direction to head in, and her mum helped her with that. Even before being a coach, Sarah was using the kind of advice on herself that she would give others later in life. But without even realizing that was what she was doing. I believe her natural ability to self-reflect and understand her own behavior and motivation is what has contributed to her being such a great coach for so many people over the last decade. An example of this is being conscious, even at such a young age, to know that people would probably be talking about her, being a teenage mum, but having the ability to recognize this for what it is and to decide not to pay any attention to what anyone else is thinking. In my view, this has played a significant part in enabling Sarah to build the life she has now. Unfortunately, we are not all conscious enough to be able to do this, but it's powerful if we can, now more so than ever. We live in a world where opinions are like assholes. Everyone's got one, and they all have the tools and mechanisms in social media to share theirs, whether anyone's interested or not. We all need the ability to switch that off and not be affected by it. Far easier said than done, I know, but think about this. How much time are we spending worrying about the thoughts and opinions of people we don't even know or like? And what is the impact of that? How often do we say we don't have enough time to do the things that could make a positive difference to our lives? But yet we can spend hours each day on the opinions of others that make no difference to us, except they rob us of the time that we cannot get back. maybe that's worth a pause and some reflection too. I hope you enjoyed listening to Sarah's story as much as I did, and hopefully you've been able to take something away that you can apply to some aspect of your life, work, and legacy. Use it. Share it with others. Sharing is like teaching, and it helps cement things in your mind, and it helps us commit to change, which is always required if we're going to enhance our life's work. I wish you well for the future. I hope you are happy, safe, and successful in all that you do. And remember, live a life that is a story worth retelling. I'm Steve Worsley, and I look forward to seeing you next time on Life's Work, the podcast all about wisdom worth sharing.